Hey there, it's Andrea, and welcome to the Voice of Influence podcast. Today I have with me John Fisher. John Fisher is a constructive psychologist and coach, and he's done a lot of work with organizational and leadership development. So I'm really looking forward to having this conversation with you today, John.
Thank you, and thank you for having me, Andrea.
Yeah. Would you mind just starting off with, obviously we sound a little different. What, where are you located and what, tell us a little bit about your background.
Okay, yes, thank you. Yep, we do sound different. I'm located in the north of England, um, just south of the Lake District in England on the northwest coast. My background, relatively peculiar background. I was born in a small village on the edge of an area of natural beauty, one of our national parks, called the Yorkshire Dales. And the Yorkshire Dales were featured on the Harry Potter films, ironically, when Harry's hiding out on the last couple of films and on some limestone pavements.
Uh-huh.
Those limestone pavements are about 20 miles, if that, from where I was born. So we've got lovely desolate scenery with hills, etc.
Mm.
But left school at 16 and joined the Royal Air Force. I'm working on aircraft radar systems predominantly, both on aircraft as well as working at and lasers working at component level, and then aircraft simulators, and then saw the light and moved into project management and
So what do you
did
mean by saw the light?
oh, I decided that, I was no good as an engineer. It didn't turn me on. You don't get a lot of interaction with a printed circuit board. It just sort of lies there and does nothing. So I realized I enjoyed people, and moved into project management, did training in counselling, in training, and became an internal consultant for a multinational organization, um, basically a manufacturing company with a worldwide footprint. Worked in their project office, then became an internal consultant, delivering a value and designing training interventions with the workforce, their customers, helping build teams, and then done various companies in building utilities, as well as a training charity, as a trainer, consultant, coach. Worked with a company doing training back into a leading financial organization with a worldwide footprint, and more latterly, a coach mentor supporting people doing a level 5 coaching apprenticeship. So worked in manufacturing, worked with manufacturing, and about 20 years ago, moved into a non-job of training, coaching, consulting, and stopped working from then on. Love it.
Because you enjoy it so much?
Yeah, yeah. Really do get a kick. Every day's different, and meeting new people, designing, delivering the same course in a different way, moving virtually to doing a lot virtually, and speaking to people all over the world.
Mm.
Hence our transatlantic call today.
Yes, yes, so fun. Um, and you in your bio, you say that you adopt a constructivist perspective
Yeah,
to empower individuals in exploring their own solutions, which sounds fascinating to me. Would you share more about what you mean by that?
certainly will, Andrea. Effectively, a guy called George Kelly, who worked at a couple of Midwestern universities in the 1950s to his untimely death, um, 10, 15 years later, called George Kelly. He worked in the university and came up with a theory of personal constructs. And his theory is based on effectively, we approach situations based on our past experiences and act as if that's true. So it's a really dynamic theory that literally looks at us moving forwards. He said things like, "We're not a victim of our biography," and that we can change. We can change our mind. We can change how we behave. Also, that we can behave in different ways in the same situation at different times.
Mm.
So, really motivational dynamic as a theory. And when I came across it in the Open University, it was just like this guy wrote my life. It just put so much into context of how I saw the world and how I interacted with the world. Because he says we see the world through a series of filters effectively that then help how we act and how we interact with people, but we interact from our perspective. So we have a unique take on it based on our background, our personality. And therefore, to effectively engage with somebody, you need to understand their language. So what do they mean by the words they use? Not what do I mean?
Yeah.
And this certainly in that early 90s was really a light bulb moment because historically the talking therapies, um, all based on the therapist being the expert
Mm.
and telling you their interpretation of you, goes back to Freud and psychoanalysis, etc. Where what Kelly said was actually the expert on you is you, and I need to understand what you say from your perspective. So, in constructivist terms, the client tells the therapist or tells the constructivist psychologist the answer, not the psychologist telling the client the answer. And that just made so much more sense to me than the other way around.
Hmm.
So, hence my constructivist. There's a
Yeah.
few other things in there, but that's the gist of it.
It's so interesting. The You talked about seeing the world through filters. When you're talking about changing and people being open and willing to change, does it require them to kind of relook at their filters? Or yes, okay. I was wondering if it had more to do with that or figuring out how to use the filter in a different way. But what does
It's
that
a bit
look
of
like?
both of them. Yeah.
Okay.
Kelly came up with a quote that when I'm doing training and change work goes on the wall. People can change anything, but must first change themselves.
Mm,
So that's a look at how they interact with the world or how they interpret other people's interactions.
mm,
And it's about that recognition that maybe there's another viewpoint, another way of seeing things that help us make more sense. A family therapist, Dr. Harry Proctor, came up with a little model he calls the bow tie model of interaction. And basically, there's me and there's you. You do something, I interpret it from my perspective, my filters, my reasons for doing, and I react as if you've done it for the same reasons I would. You
yeah.
then go through the same, you interpret, you make sense of through your filters, and then you react to me in the way that if I'd have been you, I would have done it. And we end up with that virtuous or vicious cycle of interactions that if it's going well is great. But if it's not going well and we've got that clash, then the only person who can change that dynamic is me, by acting differently, by doing something different, because you've no reason to change unless I give you a reason to change. So it explains why interactions can go wrong. There's just a miscommunication. And I use the expression a lot. A communication is not what I say, it's what you hear.
Mhm.
And your hearing of that then dictates how that dynamic moves on.
Yeah, it's so true. And that's so interesting. I mean, we look a lot at that dynamic too, where you have to be able to there's the sender and there's the receiver, there's the
Mm,
initiator and the receiver, and you are both in
yeah,
any interaction as well. And so how do you prepare yourself for listening, but while at the same time communicating something that is authentic and still reaches the other person in the way that they're thinking? What are your thoughts on all of that?
yeah, and it's fascinating. And I was listening to one of your podcasts a while ago where you were reflecting on the state of what was happening at that time and just where you were. And again, some of the things you said there really resonated because it was that you trying to make sense of making sense almost. So it's some of it's reflection and
Mhm,
it's what worked well last time, what didn't work as well. Um, some of it's thinking about the language that we use and being open to different interpretations. So
mm,
I use the distinction between introvert and extrovert a lot. And sort of one of the ways is if I asked you, what does the word extrovert mean to you? I might get answers like loud, noisy, life and soul of the party, in your face, always laughing, always joking, each of which have lots of con- um, correlations with other things, the stereotyping type. Uh, whereas other people may see it in different ways, will see it in different ways with different connotations and everything. And the same with introvert. You've got the wallflower, the shy, the quiet, the stuck in a corner, not interested, whatever it might be. And they dictate how we interact with people. So part of that preparation potentially is to just take a moment to think about leaving your judgment behind, leaving your ego behind, and being prepared to listen rather than react.
mhm,
And so it's just getting yourself into the right headspace to then do empathic listening to what's not being said as well as what's being said and not jump in.
mm. Yeah, it seems like then curiosity would quickly follow.
Very much so. And for me, that is one of the cruxes about being curious. And it's using that and dipping into that and that curiosity from a non-judgmental sense, because Kelly also talks about we make the best decisions that we can with the information that we have at that moment in time. And so anything you do, whether I agree or disagree, is the best thing for you. So part of my role as a consultant is to help you see alternatives, help you come up with other ways that may be more effective without denying your right to have made that choice in the first place.
Hmm. So personal agency is a big piece of what we talk about, and,
Yeah,
um, that the fact that a person gets to choose what they're going to do is so important. It sounds like what you're saying is one of the things that you're able to do as a consultant is to help demonstrate or at least, lay out options and
yeah.
potential consequences so that they can make a decision.
Mm, very much so. And personal agency is fundamental to a constructivist approach. Kelly called his book The Psychology of Personal Constructs. So it's right at the heart of it is the personal element of it. And that can be quite scary and threatening from people who've come up through the psychoanalytical, the behavioralist paradigms, because they deny personal autonomy in lots of areas and ways, um, and don't feel as comfortable with the fact that I can just make a different decision if I want to. And it's about making a decision and living with the consequences. And if you don't like the consequences, change your decision. But a lot of people don't feel they have that personal autonomy and hence don't feel comfortable, confident, secure in changing the decision, which is why people get into a rut. constantly repeat the same mistakes and become to believe they're not worthy of anything different and better. And we see it all the time in life as well as in leadership, where people just adopt one style of leadership rather than, in the UK, we have a horse racing expression, horses for courses, and it's about getting the right horse for the right ground, for the right length, for the right
Yeah.
jumping or um, flat, etc. And it's a recognition that it's a different style for everybody, which can be scary again, as for a leader to have to treat their whole team as individuals.
Yeah. There's so many things here to talk about. I mean, so first of all, um, when we're talking about promoting the idea of personal agency, there's also this kind of rub with the structure that they're in. So, the sociology kind of rub, I guess. So what's your take on how to help people have personal agency while still aligning to the structure of the company?
Yeah, a really good question, Andrea. And in many ways, one of the things that has a life of its own outside me, some 20 odd years ago, coming up for 25 years ago, I was thinking about this and I was doing counselling specifically, predominantly at that time as a volunteer for a couple of organisations, one of which was for people with or whose a family member had a alcohol dependency. And I started seeing a trend in what I was doing, and people would come for the first session, have a really, really good session, book in for the second session the following week, and then not turn up. And went through the initial, "It's me, I'm rubbish, I'm just not very good at this, let's go and do something else" type. And then recognised that all my colleagues had the same phenomenon. And I started playing around with it and termed it in those days the theory of second no-show. And I started looking about it's that emotional impact on their sense of identity that stops them coming back.
Hmm.
And one of the problems with people who want to recover and go through that recovery from a dependency of some sort is it usually means a total lifestyle change.
Mm.
And if you are quite comfortable in some areas of your life, it's difficult to change it. And it impacts on your sense of identity. Does this mean I've got to lose all my friends? Does this mean I've got to change everything I've done? Does this mean I'm not very good? And does this mean I'm unworthy and I don't know what to do? As you go down into that trough of despondency
Mm.
type area. And I was familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's superb bereavement curve,
Yeah.
and I realized that any change is a loss, just as bereavement is a loss on a very intimate and personal
That
level.
that
But
is
so is
so
change.
that is so, insightful and important. I just wanna pause there for a second
Thank
and
you.
recognize that because the change being a loss and people recognizing that and the need for grief,
Yeah,
I can totally understand it, I see it, and I also see why people avoid it.
yeah,
People don't wanna
totally.
grieve.
Yeah,
We don't wanna deal with loss. Do you
no,
Can you just explore that a little bit more with us?
yeah, and you're hitting all the right nails on the head there, Andrea. It's a scary place to be because it means you've got to change who you are in some ways because you've lost maybe a dependency in a non-negative way, but you've lost knowing what's happening. You've lost knowing that you can do something, and you've maybe had a sense of threat to your personal agency that can then roll on and knock onto every other decision you've made. Why didn't I see this coming? I've done training courses and some quite interesting ones where people have come to do a training skills, how to do presentations, and have had people in the 40s and 50s who've said a couple of things. One is, this is the first time I've been back in a classroom since I was 16.
Wow.
In the UK, you can leave school at 16 and that's it. And also people in tears at the thought of having to stand up and talk to somebody because
Mm.
it's just so scary to who they are, because they've had lots of negative reinforcements in life and been put down or things go wrong, that they just feel bewildered around on there. So it's giving them those experiences that confirm the positive, support the positive, and help them start taking control and ownership of the implications of the impact of that change. And saying sometimes, look, it's right to go. If you're in a job that's bad, that's toxic, if you're being asked to compromise your own personal values and beliefs, then leave the job. Get out before it destroys who you are even more, and just go. And that's one of the ways off the curve. It's about helping them route plan, giving closure on the past, and then helping them form a way to move through into a healthier state and a healthier choice place.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah. I also think of business owners or people who have invested a lot in a structure, whether that be the
mm,
business or some other kind of structure. They've invested a lot. They were a part of laying the foundation. And now so much is changing.
yeah,
There's no choice but to change.
yeah,
People that are younger are coming up saying, sorry, but you're going to have to change if you want us to work here.
totally.
But that they feel very threatened by that,
Yeah,
and so the grief of, like you were saying, it causes you to, well, do I have to question all my other things that I've ever done and the
totally.
foundation that I laid here? Did I do it wrong? What? No, I
Yeah,
didn't. I did a good job. And so they feel defensive.
yeah.
I'd love for you to speak to that.
Yeah, totally. And that's part of it. They do feel defensive within there because it's a massive impact. If, as you say, did I do it all wrong? Have I always been bad? Have I always done this? Because that really cuts and hurts. So
Yeah,
it's recognizing that we're not the victim of our biography, that were the choices we made at that time. It's also maybe sometimes learning new software languages, new systems, new processes, new structures when you've done it the same way for years and you've got a millennium coming up and you're a baby boomer, and so you feel threatened by that gap as well, that you think is your fault because by now you're sort of getting into that stage. Well, I should have seen this coming. If I'd have had any sense 10 years ago, I'd have retrained on this when I saw it happening. And we don't make enough of the classic IBM quote by one of their top people, personal computers will never take off. There isn't a market for them. um, and maybe want to bring it home and turn the tables on you, Andrea, if I may.
sure.
If you go back some 500 podcasts, how did you feel just before your first podcast?
How did I feel about podcasting?
Uh, about doing this, yeah, about doing that very first podcast with your
Yeah.
first subject that you came to as you were preparing to come into it.
Hmm. I think there were a number of things. One was definitely excitement, because I liked the idea of being a part of a bigger conversation
Mm,
and bringing people in to conversation and being able to be a part of the dialogue
yep,
and amplifying important messages. So those kinds of things I was excited about. I was certainly nervous about what what exactly is my goal? Am I going to meet my goal when it comes to podcasting? Is this worth all the time and energy it's taking? Those kinds of things too. Does that
yeah,
answer your question to where you're trying to
totally.
go? Okay.
Yep, that's exactly, and they're the first few stages on the change curve
Yeah.
around that excitement and that something's going to change. Great, but then How will it go? Will they speak? Will I ask the right questions? Will I make a fool of myself by
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
understanding ... because they know so much more than me? And that then starts going down. And if you internalize that, as some people do, so if there's a bit of self-confidence issues there, you don't feel comfortable in your own skin, and the first one doesn't go as well as you wanted it to, whatever that means. It might have been brilliant, but we can be our own worst critics. You then start worrying about the next one, and we all know stress and nerves plays havoc on performance. So you get a few more. That then starts, why on earth did I put myself and make myself do this? I should have just stayed in the old job that I knew inside out. I was comfortable. And you go down. And it's taking that step out of that step back to say, hang on a minute, they've been good. I'm still doing it. I'm getting good feedback. I'm getting good listening figures. Therefore, I'm doing something right. And that then allows you to make it work to bring now. And I bet virtually none of those initial feelings, apart from the excitement of a new guest, were there this afternoon, this morning, yesterday, whenever, because you're now at the top of your game here. And it just makes that journey. And while every person will be different, even when you have somebody back for a second time, it's still a different conversation because you're different, they're different. And it's the old quote, you can't put your foot in the same river twice. Things have moved on. So every interview you do is unique, even with the same person.
Hmm. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I do. So I let's go into your change curve. So the Fisher change curve.
Yeah,
You adopted or you made some adjustments to something you already knew. Is that correct?
that's correct. Yeah. Well, Kubler-Ross, I mean, it's a lovely structure and process for the bereavement side of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are slight differences for an emotional impact in a business setting or in a work setting. So it didn't quite fit the work.
Mm.
Elements do, so we're still bargaining. But this is more about the impact on me having to go through change in various ways. And it came out of, as I say, the counselling and people realising that impact. So the curve came from that and seems to help people make their life adjustments and changing jobs. People have found it useful to think about, so how will I adapt to a new way of working? Now, as with Kubler-Ross, I put it in a curved shape and I talk about it as if it's linear, and it isn't. People can move backwards and forwards, drop it off it, come out of it at any place that works at that time. There's a couple of trapdoors in there potentially to take you. Um, but it just works from a visual point of view to help people recognize that it's cyclic. And one of the hidden, hopefully, subconscious messages is things change and it will get better. Just carry on going and
Yes.
persist. Because by having that and ending up at the same place you started, sends that subconscious message, carry on going and you'll get through it as long as you carry on going.
Mm. That's so important to resilience, which I
Mm,
feel is kind of a struggle for some folks right now.
yeah,
And
totally.
the tendency to drop out of a relationship, of
Mm,
a job, of anything when it starts to feel a program, maybe when it starts to feel hard. Well, like that
yeah.
your example at the very beginning, the thing that got you started at this is the first place. When people start to see that they're uncomfortable, that they're going to be uncomfortable,
Mm,
to be able to have a visual that says, "But it's gonna get better. You just
yeah.
keep going down, keep going on your path."
Mm,
Yeah, that
very
seems
much
really
so.
important.
Yeah. And I think I also added on a couple of routes out of it. One is it's better for me to go. I'm not prepared to compromise who I am.
Mm,
I'm worth more than
sure,
this.
sure.
Um, the power way down. But I've also got a couple more that are in there that are only distinguished by energy investment. So at a very low energy, there's denial. So just carry on oblivious, refuse to accept that the change has happened, and just stick your head in the sand. And at another very high energy, there's what I've termed in a Kellian sense hostility, which is a lot of energy involved in proving you're an idiot for making me to change. And I'm going to carry on doing it the old way um, because I don't want to change. And those two say why a lot of people stay in toxic relationships, toxic workplaces, because they either pretend it'll get better one day or they fight against it and say, nope, I'm going to make sure, I'm going to prove that this changes. The old system doesn't need to change and I will reform, I will. And I think it was Oscar Wilde talking about second marriages from the Victorian days,
Mm.
who said a second marriage is the triumph of hope over experience. And that's on one level, that hostility. But hopefully you've made a better choice the second time around in whatever it is. And it could be going back to a company you left a few years before, expecting it to have changed, and rarely does it.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Um, gosh, this is so great. I love this conversation. Obviously, I'm going to need to learn more and dig a little more into constructivist psychology because I'm very, very interested in what you're saying about this stuff. When it comes to communicating change and doing that in a way that hopefully people can receive. So
Hmm.
they have their filters, as you
Mhm.
mentioned. They're looking at the world from one direction, you're looking at the world from another direction. What kinds of things do you feel like are important when it comes to communicating change?
Yeah. Um, I think there's a few things that are really fundamental. I think the first thing I'd say is a recognition that during times of change, you can never over communicate. No
Yeah.
matter how much you communicate, it won't be enough.
Yeah.
Um, and the other big thing is one of the things I say regularly is organizations do not change, people change. And you've almost got to change the organization one person at a time. Luckily, it's not quite that bad, but we've got to get the people to change to be able to then have organizational change. And for me, the crux of that is engagement. You need to engage the people. You need to give them lots of briefings, lots of communications, involve them in focus groups, involve them in talking, the fireside stories, looking at that. And as part of that sort of communication process, you need to acknowledge what worked in the past, what was really good about the old ways of life, but then close it down
Yeah.
and close down and allow people to then move on. So celebrate past successes and then almost have a birth party. So you have your separation party or you have your house leaving party. You then have your housewarming party to move into the new house and do it in the new way. It's also about involving and engaging people in creating that new vision. What's the future look like? What will they be doing, saying? How will they be doing, saying it? Who will they be doing, saying it with? And then facilitating a route map to get from the past to the future that allows people to do it really effectively as well in that way. So engagement is fundamental for me. Um,
Yeah.
if I may share a technique I've also found really, really useful by a guy called Finn Schude. He calls it the ABC technique purely because there's three areas to it. So A is where am I now? Where do I want to be? B is the advantages of where I want to be and the negatives of where I am now. So the argument for change,
Yeah.
the burning platform, the pros and cons of moving type. But what Finn then did is he turned that round and said, well, we lose something with every change. So what are the advantages of the current situation? What's good about it? What am I doing that I like, etc.? And what will I lose when I change and when I move to the new situation? So what are the pros of staying and the cons of going and moving? And if that line is more powerful than the argument for change, people just won't change.
Yep.
No matter what you do, they won't change. So what Finn's technique does, and I get them to brainstorm, I get them to score and give values to each of the statements, it allows you to get some low-hanging fruit. It allows you to identify the real big barriers that you're going to get to change that may sabotage or make the change fail, and to then embody those into your change plan and help people work through effectively. So, um, in one sense, I've run workshops with teams where my hidden, in inverted commas, agenda is to basically get them to be turkeys voting for Thanksgiving, and succeeded.
Okay, you said so much there. And one of the things that I talk about is telling the story of your decision
Mm.
making process. You know,
Oh,
sometimes
yeah,
people just need to
important.
understand, like, where'd this come
Yeah.
from?
Mm.
Well, why are we doing this? Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really important, that as part of it. And for me, two of the most powerful influencers is the word because. Give them a reason to
Mhm.
help them understand why you're forcing them to change, because that's how they'll potentially perceive it. And the other one is with them, what's in it for me? But the
Yeah,
what's in it for me needs to be from their perspective. So what do
exactly.
they get? Not what are you giving them? What do they get from whatever that change is? And again, different people, it will be different things. Some might get a buzz out of learning something new, might get a buzz out of a different seat with a different view. Whatever these things are, it's what's important for them. The classic negotiation skills, isn't it?
Mm,
You negotiate away something that you don't need for something that they do,
mm,
and you get that balance. And it's always got to be about meeting their needs, and how can you do that and understand their language.
mm. And I'm remembering now too where what I was wanting to highlight also is honoring the past and what we've
Mm,
built and
mm.
and being able to, like, I don't know, ceremoniously, it sounds like, be able to
Yeah,
shut the door on
totally.
it and open the door to something else. I mean, that's just so important in life. So of
Yeah.
course it would be important
Well,
in
when
business.
you move house,
Yeah.
regularly you'll have a leaving party,
Yep.
and regular there's almost that going round the different rooms, stopping for a minute and
Yeah.
just taking back what you've left in those rooms back into yourself, and the memories we've got from that past. Because even though the house that you're in, the flat, wherever it is, might not be appropriate now, when you first moved in, it was what you wanted. It
Mhm.
was ideal. And it's only circumstance that changes things. So,
Right, yes.
and we tend to forget the good that was there initially, and we just focus on whatever the situation is now.
I think that's so important for people who are coming in and wanting to progress and
Yeah.
wanting to enact change or wanting to push for change. They tend I've seen, and I don't know that it always happens, but I have seen it happen where people just become like anti-establishment.
Mm,
You know, like they don't like the way it is right now,
mm,
or they don't like something about right now. And so that's one of the reasons why people in leadership can become defensive,
mm.
because you're not honoring what they have achieved.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're and people who are coming in wanting to change things are like, I don't care if I honor what you have achieved or not. I'm here to make
Yeah.
things change. But I think it comes down to practicality. Is it pragmatic? Are you gonna actually get other people to change if you don't honor their
And you
perspective?
won't.
Yeah.
Yes, you won't. And it just makes you go further into that trough of despondency,
Yeah.
because, of course, if you built a career on how you used to do things, you suddenly get a millennium coming in as a baby boomer, that says, "I'm not interested in what you've done in the past. That's totally irrelevant to me."
Yeah.
Well, it's not to me. That's my heritage. That's what I've done. That's who I've helped, supported. That's where I've left my mark. Are you now telling me my mark is worthless and everything I've done is worthless? And it's no wonder people resist because
Yeah.
they just say, well, you don't know what you're talking about. So why should I trust you on anything? Because obviously you don't know what you're talking about. That just makes it so much harder for the change agent to get the change through because they've lost all credibility.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
Fascinating topic,
It is
Andrea.
so fascinating. I feel like we could talk about this for a long time. John, can you tell us more about where people can find you and your work?
Yeah, so the easiest way to find me is on www.c2d, that's Charlie, the number 2, delta.co.uk. And the C2D stands for coaching, counselling and development. So I'm a bearer simple brain. So there's 2 C's and a D in it, in the company title. So that's got a lot more on some of the personality profiles and my favourite personality profile. It's got a few of the papers I've given at conferences and free informations there to download, as well as a lot more information on personal construct theory and some of the other work that I do. LinkedIn, I'm slightly harder to find. Maybe John M. Fisher or C2D, but I just before we started, I picked up something for a friend who wanted to tag me onto LinkedIn and couldn't find me, so they didn't tag me in. Um,
Well, we'll we'll
However,
we'll link to it in the show notes. We'll find you and we'll link to it.
so yeah, and that's probably the easiest way to get in contact and just drop me a line. More than happy to chat to anybody anytime.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you sharing your experience and your wisdom. This has been a really enjoyable conversation for me. And, this is the Voice of Influence podcast.
Mm.
So, my last question for you is what last piece of advice would you want to give to somebody who would like to have a voice of influence?
I think the most important thing for anybody, and I certainly think here in the UK, our education system doesn't naturally help people, but I'd say trust yourself.
Hmm.
Always trust yourself. You know better than you give yourself credit for. And I think that, and I'm sure you've come across that many a time with people who don't trust themselves for the wrong reasons or don't feel comfortable or confident. You're a unique individual. You're making decisions for the right reasons for you at this moment in time, and you have the power to change and walk away or walk into. So trust yourself.
Hmm.
Long answer to a short question, Andrea.
Love it. Thank you so much for being a voice of influence today with our listeners. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me. I thoroughly enjoyed it, Andrea. Thank you.